I wanted to talk today, hey fellas, about wisdom, and we haven't talked about it in a while. And I was reminded, those of you that were here on Wednesday, Joe Bernheim was kind of inspired me. He talked about, this metaphor of the bird, where one wing is wisdom and one wing is compassion, and you need both of them to fly, and that they're complementary. And if you just have wisdom without compassion, it's hard to know where that would go. And with compassion without wisdom can turn into pity or turn into, self-righteous anger or whatever. So I really love that metaphor, and it got me thinking about revisiting wisdom this morning. And and the Buddha really emphasized this, and he sort of started his teachings on wisdom with a couple of simple questions. And the first one is, what actions that I initiate will lead to my long-term welfare and happiness? And secondly, what actions will avoid causing harm? And to him, those were sort of the two critical questions when employing wisdom in our practice. And I don't need to tell you that, these questions require no small amount of discernment, okay, to answer either one of them. And but the wisdom here lies in realizing it's the starting gate that our happiness depends on what we do, how we act, what intentions we set, and so forth. But the good news is that we have choices when it comes to cultivating our wisdom. The bad news is the choices are rarely easy ones. They're not clear cut, they're not black and white, they're not always simple choices. But, part of wisdom is understanding that the pursuit of our happiness is worthwhile only if it's long term. Okay, short term happiness, getting that buzz from a new toy, a new shiny object, or whatever, is fleeting. It's almost always followed by a letdown. It's not the answer, as we talk about here often, to long term happiness. One of the tests of how far our wisdom has matured, one of the things we can sort of look inside about is are we skillfully keeping ourselves from doing things which cause harm to ourselves, harm to others, harm to the environment, and so forth? And are we skillfully doing things that lead to long-term well-being and happiness? In other words, mature wisdom requires a mature ego that we talked about recently. Purity in mind and action grows from providing ego-based wisdom and compassion with a reality check built in. There's a wonderful teaching in which the Buddha taught his son, whose name was Rahula, that purity is developed by examining one's actions and the results of those actions to make sure they actually cause no harm to oneself or to those around us. Okay. In other words, simply put, if we anticipate harm from an intended action, we don't do it. We refrain from doing it, which is why noticing and pausing is so important. Because if we just shoot from the hip, if we just act impulsively, it's kind of a roll of the dice whether it's going to cause harm or not. If we see unanticipated harm coming from something we've done, we freely admit it. We don't deflect it. We don't deny it. We don't excuse it, and then we learn not to repeat it. That was the lesson that the Buddha was offering in terms of the cultivation of wisdom. We don't cling to the need to always be right. We don't cling to the need to always explain away our harmful actions. We don't try to justify our unskillful actions. We own our mistakes without a lot of self-judgment. We let go and then we move on. Okay. Conversely, when we see that we aren't causing harm, we take joy in the fact that we're on the path to true happiness, to true freedom. That is wisdom. That is discernment. That is the path that the Buddha taught. And wisdom underlies every aspect of the practice. It underlies everything we do on this path. So I wanted to dig down a little deeper into wisdom by sharing one example from the Buddha's teachings that I think illustrates this well. So it's not well known that the Buddha never told his followers, sorry, to practice his teachings without expecting any gain in return. He understood that if not expecting a return on the effort would create an unhealthy dynamic, an imbalanced dynamic in the mind. He was not he wasn't teaching renunciation, that we should never expect anything back from what we do and from our skillful actions. Okay. He said that even the principle of renunciation itself involved a trade-off. Okay. The metaphor that he used was that if we exchange candy or sweets, I forget the exact term in the Sutta, but the implication was, a sweet something to eat. If we exchange candy for gold, we trade a lesser treasure for greater happiness. He said, in other words, if we go for that short-term hit from the candy, then we, you know, do we not want to trade that for a gold, which is more lasting? He encouraged us to be generous with our time and our possessions because of the inner rewards we receive in return. Okay. Generosity benefits both the recipient of our generosity as it does ourselves. He never said that we shouldn't benefit from our generosity. He was a pragmatist. He understood that. He's a realist. And the wisdom is in understanding that, not letting selfishness creep into that, and not letting generosity be a transactional thing where, I give you something and I expect something back, but that the reward is internal. I feel good for acting on my generous impulses. But he also understood that all we humans have a strong component of self-interest that we now know in modern times derives from our survival instincts. Okay. It's normal, it's unavoidable that we have this self-interest. It's not something to chastise ourselves about. So that even when he was advocating that his disciples abandon their selfish interest, he justified this on the basis that they not abandon all their selfish interests. I'm sorry, that he justified it on the basis of the rewards that it would bring. That yes, and so he once said to his monks, quote, "If anyone were to burn the trees in this monastery, would you suffer with the sense that they were burning you?" "No," the monks replied, "because we're not the trees." In the same way, the Buddha said, "Let go of what's not you or yours, the senses and the object. This will bring you long-term well-being and happiness." Notice he didn't say abandon any self-interest, any sense of self as a form of self-sacrifice. He has said let it go for the sake of true well-being and happiness, but there's always going to be an element of self-interest in that. It's just part of the human condition. The types of functioning we associate in the modern West with a well-developed ego, he would have described as, I mean, if one can infer, is this well-developed sense of cause and effect focused on the insights that we have about the results of our actions. We see that they cause no harm, but we also see that they bring us, we feel good about them. We feel good because they cause no harm. We feel good because they benefit others. Buddhist practice is aimed at refining those insights to a deeper and deeper level of sensitivity and skill. So he was really teaching, I think, healthy ego functioning while avoiding the twin pitfalls of ego obsession, either narcissism on the one hand or self-hatred on the other. He's talking about that middle way, that balanced ego. He would have us drop our unhealthy and unskillful ways in favor of ways that are more skillful and refined. And this is where wisdom and discernment come into play, making those distinctions. So we again see that he was advocating healthy ego development, not this false notion of no self, no ego that's been misunderstood in terms of his teaching. He was talking about no fixed self, but he wasn't talking about the absence of self-interest. He was just saying that we need to manage it skillfully, but still benefit from our generous actions. And this is an example of bringing wisdom to bear on the practice, okay? And it's why wisdom is so important to our path, because these can be subtle and sometimes challenging distinctions. So Let me stop there. I hope I haven't totally confused.